Next up, we have Luiza Dudley, Senior Management Accounting and Reporting Team Lead at Heineken Global Services. Hello, Luiza.
Good afternoon now already.
Yeah, it's
Thank you
1
for
minute
having me.
past in Poland. Exactly. We're addressing a very interesting topic. One, to be frank with you, I've been waiting to talk to you, Luiza. We are talking about lonely in a foreign culture. We had this chat the other day in preparation for the conference, and I thoroughly enjoy the depth and the personal nature of this conversation. So let me start with, how are you today?
Good. Another lovely day in Krakow. Very sunny. The weather is improving a little bit. Unfortunately, the pandemic times are not making things easy for us, but generally good. Thank you. And yourself?
But I see you're making your life a little more joyful with some Christmas items on your windowsill. So I suppose that should...
Yes. Yes, my daughter has decided that it's time for Christmas, and Christmas tree is up, the decorations are up, so we're getting into the festive season.
Luiza, you've had a fascinating background. You're now in Poland, but it's been quite a journey before you came to Poland. What you've learned on the way, especially in the context of our D&I conversation, and being exposed to all kinds of obstacles, perceptions, labels on the way. So can we start this conversation? Tell us something about yourself.
Okay, so maybe I'll start a little bit from the beginning. I was born in Poland when it was the difficult communism times, early 80s. My parents then decided it was time to look for greener pastures. And we found ourselves as refugees in Austria for a certain amount of time, during which my parents then had a big choice to make as to where we're going to end up in this world. And for various reasons, they eventually decided on South Africa. And for many, many, many years, I always wondered, why South Africa? I mean, this is like the complete opposite, different culture to what we, came from. But it turned out that it was really an easy place to start a new life in, easy country, because they needed skilled people. And so I spent 33 years in South Africa. To be fairly honest, I probably feel more South African than I do Polish, because I spent the majority of my life there. But the economic, political, safety situation in Southern Africa has got to such a point that I decided to make the choice to come back to Poland with my family.
And we have been here for... It was quite an age for such a massive shift. I mean, it almost tempts me to ask you, how many Poles did you meet as a child in South Africa after you moved there? Not many, probably. It wasn't a popular destination back then, was it?
You would be actually very surprised. There was a whole community of Polish people. You could definitely get your pierogis. There was even a Polish Catholic priest that came and did his sermons on Sundays. There was quite a big Polish community in those years.
So did you go straight to the capital, or did you choose a smaller location?
First, we ended up in a smaller location in Newcastle, and then later on we moved to Johannesburg, and I spent most of my years in Johannesburg and the surrounding areas. Yes.
Well, Luiza, the title of our talk is Lonely in a Foreign Culture. Can you take us through the sense of lonely, first as a child and then discovering it's more like a homeland to you now?
Yes, I think that kind of loneliness has always been there, in the sense that, you kind of never ever, or at least for me, I didn't really feel, like within my own home country and culture. Even when I was in South Africa and I spent most of my life there, there was just always something missing. But coming back to Poland now, I realized that I'd taken on so much of the South African culture. I now kind of feel like a foreigner in my home country as such. So the adaptation in both areas is quite challenging. I mean, always when we arrived in South Africa, it was similar to when we came to Poland. We had problems with language barriers. We had problems with assimilation, with finding people that we could relate to. Also, just the cultural differences then and now are sometimes a challenge to deal with. And also, I mean, in South Africa, you also have the different racial diversity, which also we needed to adapt to.
Mm-hmm. So can we still stay for a while in the childhood phase, because before you started your professional life in South Africa, mm-hmm. in your childhood phase, what came on a purely intuitive level? Because we talked about, we quoted Sir Ken Robinson throughout the conference, and we talked about how confronted with a child's creativity, the reality changes you. So what was especially surprising in the positive sense and in the negative sense when you grew up as a child in South Africa?
I think in the positive sense, I think the ability to adapt as a child to my new reality and my new environment, and also to pick up the language. That was definitely a positive, and the fact that I, had the opportunity to really have this English language on a native basis in the long run was really quite a positive thing.
Because you know what many people would think, that when you ask them about the positive experiences of being raised as a child in South Africa, they would probably on the stereotypical level think it's lions and tigers and safaris.
Yes, definitely the living conditions are day and night in comparison to here. I mean, we had a really comfortable life, if we want to call it that. We had a really, really nice house. You have a swimming pool. You have beautiful weather every single day. Very, very short winters. So that's for sure very, very positive. And yes, we had access to some lions and cheetahs and giraffes, far more than you would have here at the zoo. You've got a lot of beautiful places that you can go and see them walking around in the wild. And in fact, when I came to Poland, one of the first questions that somebody would always ask me was, is there lions walking around in the streets? And after being asked this a couple of times, I would eventually, say, yes, you know what? I had a pet lion named Simba.
Exactly. Speaking of that, are there any other stereotypical questions that people ask you today as an adult back in Poland?
Yes, absolutely. Generally, the very first thing that I get asked, and it doesn't matter where I go, some people have the openness to really come out and ask straightforward. Others, you can see, that they want to ask this question. They just don't know how to get to it. So eventually, after being asked a couple of times, I kind of help them out and I say, okay, yes, I know your question. So is your husband black? Right. That's the main question always of interest is my husband black? And,
all right, Luiza, let me ask you this. How many times have you been asked this question over a certain period of time? We're not talking about the pandemic period. We're talking about the time when you could actually meet people.
I've lost count, to be honest, because I really have lost count. It just started becoming so funny, and
I would
I
imagine,
stopped counting,
Luiza,
honestly.
I would imagine, Luiza, that this question being obviously as blunt as it gets, and actually telling you a lot about the person who's asking it. But what's your second most favorite question? On the positive side, though, on the positive side, I would imagine that by now you would have perfected your answer to this question to the extent that it's almost your favorite answer of all. Yeah, what's the second most common question you get asked in Poland?
The second most common? Well, it was usually, I mean, is your husband black? Are there lions walking around in the streets? And then is your children, of color? And also they tend to ask me questions
And for a
about
moment there, I thought it doesn't get any worse, but no illusions now.
No, absolutely no illusions. I mean, I even got asked such a question in a bus one day, just by some random stranger, because they heard me speaking English. "Oh, where are you from?" "No, from South Africa." "Oh, is your husband black?" Just random.
I suppose it's only fair that we should add a little caveat to our conversation today, saying what Luiza is saying today is really and honestly not representative of the country as a whole. I think it's fair to say that. Now, but
Yes,
tell me,
but it is clear that there is that kind of unconscious or conscious bias, I would say, towards Africa as such. That there's no white people living there. So
yes, but then again, I suppose we cannot, much as we may like or believe that based on our experience, this is what we should think. But I think we cannot think that way. I mean, even if you look at what's happening in America these days, and if you watch all those political satire programs available on YouTube and elsewhere, when you find comedians talking to supporters of well, one presidential candidate or another, when you listen to the kind of language and arguments they give you, it's basically the same. So you find the same layers of superficiality in looking at cultures in every society, I suppose.
yes, I agree. Absolutely.
Coming to Poland, you're now at Heineken Global Services, and I'm sure this loneliness is much less of a factor now. But were there any obstacles as you tried and adapt back in Poland, and what kind of, in the context of D&I?
Many, to be really fairly honest. I think definitely working in a international multicultural company makes it a bit easier in terms of work environment.
Why a bit?
But well, probably a lot. I mean, it makes it a little bit or more comfortable, really, in that you don't have the problems with language. You don't have this kind of stereotypes within the business. You've got this multicultural environment, so it's easier to fit in. But there are a lot of stresses where adaptation is concerned, external factors, which compound and really stress a person out, that makes you feel a little bit more lonely. You also can't, or maybe to a certain extent, you don't want to reach out really to people that you work with to help to get help with like personal items. So I think what I was missing a lot, and
yeah, please finish.
Yeah. What I was missing a lot, and also with conversations with other foreigners working in the company, was some sort of support in terms of really high level indicators, even simple things. For example, like the culture within Poland. I mean, I had some funny situations where I went to a restaurant once, and given that my first language is officially English, I didn't know really that I need to say pan, pani, and this waiter told me off because I didn't say pan to him. And these kinds of things, it would have been, really useful to have known that this is the culture here and that this kind of speech should be used, as an
I see.
example.
Well, let's paraphrase President Kennedy a little playfully, because in about 3 minutes we'll talk to a city representative, the mayor's plenipotentiary for culture. So paraphrasing Kennedy, ask not what I can do for the city, but what the city could do for me. So what could the city, on a systemic level, along with companies that, well, all of us work for, could do better, more of?
I think definitely, having made the decision that you are employing some foreign people in the business, it would be really good to have a really good onboarding for these people.
But it's not the city who is employing them; it's companies. So is it the companies should be talking to the city representatives in a more structured way? What is it missing? Because perhaps the city is not fully aware of the scale of needs and possibly the type of needs. And then only you can actually talk about accountability and being able to respond to those needs. Is it fair to say that?
I would say, from a smaller perspective, that the companies can do like the little things which will make things a little bit easier for these employees. So in terms of, for example, medical providers, like if you are going to an English-speaking doctor, is it in your SLA to ensure that this doctor is also available within that kind of 3-day period or whatever it is that your SLA says? Or is that only limited to Polish doctors? These are the kinds of things that are really important to us, and it's not really thought of for other people. On a wider base, where the country itself is concerned, I mean, I think that there's a lot of things going on. At the moment, I've seen, a lot of like Interculturally that's doing quite a lot of actions to try and speak to the cities and make things better for foreigners and have that inclusion and have more sessions or meetups with foreigners to make them feel, less lonely. But there is still a lot lacking, definitely in terms of education, for example, for those that cannot afford private education. The language barrier is a huge issue in terms of, bureaucracy everywhere. And these are the kinds of external factors that really these foreigners need support with, maybe not
Luiza,
only from the business, but on a whole.
Luiza, we've run out of time, but there are 2 questions coming to us from the chat window. So if you could just try and respond to both quickly. The first one is from Carolina. That is, how do you and your husband feel about those questions that people ask you in the lion and skin color category? And the other is, what exactly is different? And that's a question from Alexandra. What exactly is different for you now in Poland?
Okay, so for the first question, I mean, because of our cultural, I suppose, difference from South Africa, that we're more open and we really take things quite lightly. For us, it's just a funny thing. So we're relatively okay with it. We kind of preempt it and we just go with it.
Yeah,
what is
probably
different?
That's the best thing to do.
Exactly. What is different coming back to Poland? I mean, I was really very small, so I can't remember very much of what Poland was like. But I can tell you that when I told my mom that I was coming back to Poland, because she was still in South Africa at the time, she said, "I'm crazy. Things are terrible in Poland. Nothing's changed. It's going to be so difficult. You're not going to find a job." And I was very, very pleasantly surprised. I mean, having seen, how Poland is really coming up. It's, really economically stable, I would say, at the moment in terms of these multinational companies. I didn't struggle really to find work. There are a lot of positives for sure in this country. And one of them, well, the biggest one and the main reason why I actually came to Poland was the safety and security aspect. This is something that maybe we take for granted here, but it was definitely a huge issue for me in South Africa, thinking that, tonight, tomorrow, at any time, I'm going to be shot or my daughter's going to be kidnapped. So it's there are a lot of positives that we take for granted.
And yet there is this final thing that I would really like to touch on. There was a specific reason why, even though for a long while you thought South Africa was your homeland, and yet you decided to move to Poland, back to Poland. What was it?
There was two factors. The one was the safety and the security, and the second factor was the future for my children. South Africa had, are going through, really, really difficult time in terms of social acceptance, I would say. And for a white South African, it is very, very difficult at the moment. So those were the two main reasons why I decided to come back to Poland, for my children's future and for the safety and security.
Luiza, it's been, I can't even describe it, an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And in the spirit of light-hearted stereotyping that we started the conversation with, let me just say that next time you go to South Africa and come back to Poland, just don't forget to bring a lion or a giraffe along to Poland with you, especially those walking on the streets.
I will do so. Thank you very much for having me in the conversation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.